My Aunt Lisa, pronounced with the Z sound, was pregnant again. I guessed this because she was constantly spitting. She and her husband only lived a few minutes away, and so she often came to our house to see us, to talk to her mother, our very wicked grandmother. It seemed they got along. My grandmother knew how to conceal her wickedness extremely well. The depth of her negativity came in different guises, shapes, and forms, and her facet of negativity was a bottomless pit. One day, ashamed from having done something shameful, I sought to hide myself from the world. I took some food from my grandmother's panier basket without asking for permission because I was extremely hungry. I hid myself in a chest box in the living room and tried to remain as still as possible. My grandmother came into the room, followed by a stranger. I knew now that I could not get out. If I did, I would be caught. The guy and Amano talked and talked for hours. From an opening, I was able to see both my grandmother and the man. They were very deep into the conversation. She was so excited. Do you know that they can put a person's soul in an animal, kill the animal, and the person in turn would die? She said. The guy listened attentively and seemed to be enjoying the conversation. I, on the other hand, created pictures in my head as she spoke. Directly behind me, in the other room, was the living quarter of my rams. A picture of my favorite emanated in my head, and I imagined how a person could be turned into an animal, then murdered. A part of my brain pondered this seriously, while the other part brandished it as fantasy. She was just talking. However, I would learn 20 years later that the dark art is no joke, and my grandmother had a good understanding of it. One could kill people without physical weapons. Later, I would understand that once the animal was killed, the witches would cook and eat the meat. It is part of their ritual. Such people knew secrets. They have their own owls they use to travel, fly at night. They will leave their bodies into the body of the owl and fly to whatever destination they wanted at night, to do whatever wickedness or negativity they chose. I was able to escape without them ever finding out. I left as soon as they left the room. About a month later, my grandmother made a most interesting pronouncement. I was standing near our renter's place, which was several yards away. She was in good spirits. She stood near the kitchen. I was looking directly at her from the other side of the house. She was talking to one of my aunts. I understood that she had gone somewhere and was reporting back what she had learned. She turned slightly to her left and said the most interesting thing. One of Yama's 3 boys would do something great for the country. I maintained a steady look on her face as I considered her words. She was serious. Given this observation, I began considering which one of us 3 boys would do this. I limited myself and settled upon my brother Esevi because he was the most daring and adventurous. Then I asked myself what he would do. This again would be one of those things that I would tuck away for years to come. A few months later, my grandmother announced that she was going to find and bring home all of my father's children. She found Elomvi and Apefa at the capital. Elomvi was supposedly one of the 2. He was about 2.5 years younger than I was. Elomvi had a slick personality, and it showed especially when he ate with others. It was normal in those days for children and adults to eat from the same bowl. Elomvi and I often ate together. Whenever this occurred, the food did not last. He had a peculiar way of hiding most of the food that he took with his hand. Take rice, for example. He would join his fingers of his right hand into a pointed circle. When he did this, only a little bit of the food showed up on the top, pointed finger area. This allowed most of the food to be hidden in his lower palm area. When he took his hand to his mouth, the majority of the food in his hand was therefore concealed. Apefa also had a distinct and interesting personality. I was only a year older than her. She had a lot to teach me about women. If only I applied those lessons to my future relationships, especially the last girl who broke my heart, about whom I have not written. To me, Apifa would have made a superb actress. She was an outgoing person, and I liked spending time with her. She was joyous and was very expressive emotionally. Unless you knew her well, she could be insincere or untruthful, and you would have totally believed her. Once, my grandfather was smoking a whole fish on a portable charcoal grill oven in the left open area of the house when he suddenly realized that he had to go do an errand. To the right of the grill was one of the people renting a room from him. When my grandfather returned, he was upset to see the grill empty. I guess he thought that it would still be there when he came back. Ha! Someone had taken the fish. He asked Esevi and I if we did it, and we answered no. The look on his face indicated that he did not believe us. I waited for Apifa to confess. She did not. In fact, she started swearing to God with her fingers that she did not do it, and had tears to show for it. Even the intonation and the echo in her voice all seemed sincere. To a complete stranger, it would have seemed that she was telling the truth. I stood near the kitchen door watching my sister's extraordinary gift of lying. She cried profusely and begged my grandfather to believe her. Seeing this audacious Oscar performance, I knew that a third party had to come to our rescue. I turned my eyes to the guy renting the room from us. I stared at him intently. I definitely saw him look at me. I waited for him to say something. Before I knew it, he turned to my grandfather and told him that he saw Apifa take the smoked fish. Despite this, my sister persisted with her lie. Fortunately, it was now clear from his face that my grandfather no longer believed her. I was supposed to learn here was that no matter how nice or loving someone appears to be, he or she may not be strong enough to demonstrate his or her inner bright purity. Several months later, we received a guest one inauspicious evening. She had recently traveled abroad where my father was supposed to be hiding from the government. I'm very sure it was the Ivory Coast. Chairs were brought out for her and the adults to sit. They were placed under the avocado tree that was in the center of the house. A kerosene was also brought out. Our guest seemed to be in her early 40s, a little bit on the plus size, and light-skinned. She was wearing a white shirt and a dress and was very pretty. She reported that she was with my father before he died. Shortly after I obtained news of my father's death, some of my interest waned. One of such things was the ridiculous formal education system. This was the excuse that I needed to skip school. I did not like going to school at all. I was not learning anything, and besides, we were constantly beaten in the hand and in the buttocks. My first grade teacher did not teach. He spoke Ewe the majority of the time. Since I really did not feel that I was learning, one Wednesday morning, I decided to skip school and go fishing. Besides, I needed the money a lot more than this futile education I was being given. Thus, on that morning, I decided to have fun. I went to Lomeme. There was not a single person at the river. I fished all morning, but was only able to catch one catfish. Given that my fellow students would be returning home soon, I left the river as quickly as I could. As I approached the central place where the village obtains drinking water, I held my breath, being nervous that one of my classmates or schoolmates might see me. That was precisely what happened. Agbesi, one of the boys in the village with the same name, the same first name, saw me and reported me to the teacher. That same afternoon, I already understood that this same Agbesi was spreading the rumor that he actually saw me fishing. He was lying, of course. Fear of being beaten took over me, and I refused to go to school the ensuing day. Given these rumors, I feared that my buttocks would be swollen by beatings if I were to return to school. The short first grade teacher had a small wooden baton, which he had over the years. He even christened it as Togwik Pui, which translates as short grandfather. The image of Togwik Pui dancing around my buttocks swiftly weighed heavily upon my mind. I stood in the front portion of our house that day as two school students passed the main road. One of them was quite nice to report to me the danger I was going to be in if I were brave enough to return to school. Agbasi told the teacher that you skipped school to go fishing. The teacher said that he is going to give you a good ass whooping when you return. The second student displayed a serious countenance in agreement of the first. I studied his visage cautiously. Upon such serious observation, I understood that I could never return to school again. No, it was not safe to go back. The teacher delighted in whipping his children. He used to do it as he chewed cola nuts right in the classroom. Friday came and I still did not return to school. By Monday afternoon, my grandmother had understood what was transpiring. She understood that I would never go back to that school. I had decided that taking the physical abuse was not worth obtaining a formal education. Having understood this, she went to talk to my first grade teacher. She came back in the evening with a smile to report her success. I still vividly recall her gait as she entered from the left entrance of the house. I looked at her inquisitively as I waited for her report. You can go back to school now. No, not happening. He's not going to beat you anymore. She did not explain why my teacher would no longer beat me, and I did not ask her. Yet, all I knew was that I could not trust her. I did not go to school the next day either. I stayed home doing absolutely nothing. I didn't worry much about obtaining a formal education, but I still did not have a plan for making it as an adult. I went outside to the street right in front of our house. This was a paved road that separated the village into two. To get to the other side, I climbed the hollow ground. On the other side were big rock seats where young people and adults alike hung out, usually at night when women were selling food. I sat on a rock seat. Usually the place was bustling with energy, but given the time of day, its dullness was understandable. Most of the children were at school and the adults were off working. As I sat there, as I would numerous other times, I watched cars pass. Some sped by really fast, while others went by slowly. Thoughts of my father entered my mind. You're never returning again? Never? How did they kill you? I wonder how school was going. Togwikpui, were you beaten in the street like the lady said? Beaten to death? That must have been very painful. Eyadema, how could he have done this? I saw a tall man on the ground. A couple of soldiers with rifles were standing over him. One of them struck my father in the face with intensity. A tooth gave out. He could barely breathe. Dark blood filled his mouth. He could not move. You could not tell whether or not his eyes were closed. The thick bruises of his brows obscured them. A car zoomed by so fast that it shook me out of my reverie. I was suddenly feeling downcast and depressed. I looked toward the west, the direction of Kwalime. The car was now far away at a distance. I brought my eyes back to the center, to our house. As I did this, more images of my father came to me. I was on the steps near the living room. He was below. He was teaching me how to shoot a plastic toy gun. The bullet was elastic. He pulled the trigger, thus launching the bullet in the air. I watched with a smile and excitement. I went to recover the bullet. My father joined me. He put it into the plastic gun again and handed it to me. I shot it. I loved the noise the gun made as the bullet ascended and traveled in the air. He smiled at me. Another car would pass, and I would leave this memory. Some of the students were returning from school now. A few of them passed and waved to me. They were a few yards away from me, but I could still hear their conversation. It was about me. They said that I was not going to school because my father's death was taking a toll on me. I brooded over their words for a few seconds. Why were they saying this? Yes, it was true that the whole village knew about my father's death. But why would these students be saying that this was the reason for my absence from school? I purposely skipped school to go fishing, and one of my classmates had told on me, and that was the real reason why I refused to attend. It did not make any sense. Amano, that was it. My grandmother had told my teacher that I was sad because of my father's death. I understood now. I walked toward the village's water pump in order to hear more. I did not hear anything else.